It was a Tuesday. I remember because the mail hadn't come, at least not in the ordinary sense. No creaking mailbox flap, no thump on the floor, just a knock. Sharp, deliberate, as though the knocker knew I was inside, knew I was listening, and perhaps knew I wouldn't ignore it. When I opened the door, there was no one there, only a single envelope resting on the threshold. Thick parchment, yellowed at the edges, sealed with what looked like wax, black, not red. Embossed with an unfamiliar crest, a circle of thorns wrapped around what might have been an open eye or a wilted rose. Inside, the letter was handwritten in a looping, archaic script that smelled faintly of mold and lavender. To the journalist who wrote of the Grave Rose Asylum, I have read your words, and I believe you will understand. I am the last of the Lenley line. I will not be here much longer. Come to Ashmill, to the old estate on Hallowmere Road. I must confess, and it must be you who listens. No signature, just a date and time. Thursday, 5 p.m. The Lenleys. That name stirred something. An article I'd almost written years ago. A buried folder in my research drive. The Lenley tragedy was a blip in the history of Ashmill. An entire family vanished in the 1930s. Whispers of mental illness, fires, and missing children. No confirmed survivors. But someone wanted to talk. And not just someone. The last Lenley. I should have ignored it, tossed it as a prank. But my fingers kept returning to the strange seal, tracing the thorns, the cracked symbol at its center. By midnight, I had my recorder packed. By morning, my tank was full, and by Wednesday evening, I was halfway to Ashmill, watching the sky turn a bruised, ugly shade of gray. Ashmill wasn't on most maps anymore. GPS failed just past the county line, and even the gas station attendant gave me a look when I asked for directions. "Lenley Place?" he asked, tapping the rim of his coffee mug. "No one goes up there, not unless they're looking to get lost." I didn't tell him I'd been looking to get lost for years, ever since my first article on the Grave Rose Asylum drew out old families with older secrets, ever since I started collecting confessions that didn't belong in any newspaper. As the roads narrowed and the trees closed in, my phone died without warning. Full battery 1 second, black screen the next. The last sign I passed had no name, only an arrow carved in wood, pointing toward a road overgrown and splitting from the asphalt like a scar. That was Hallowmere Road. The Lenley estate didn't appear so much as emerge. One moment I was pushing through fog and buckling forest, the next the trees fell away like curtains, and there it stood. A mansion, crumbling but defiant, its Gothic peaks knifing the sky. Vines strangled its chimney stacks, and ivy pulsed against the windows like veins beneath skin. The gates were open, not rusted or locked, but waiting. I parked on the overgrown gravel path and stepped into silence so thick it smothered my breath. No birds, no wind, just the slow groan of the house settling in its rot. I reached the front steps, and the door creaked open before I could knock. She was already there, sitting in a high-back chair in the center of the foyer, surrounded by dust and draped furniture. Thin as porcelain, dressed in mourning black, her white hair pulled into a bun so tight it lifted her skull like a mask. "You're early," she rasped, voice like a knife across old linen. "Good. We have much to discuss." She did not offer her name, but I knew. This was Isadora Lenley, the last matriarch. I introduced myself, fumbling for my recorder. Her pale eyes followed my movements with the weight of a bird of prey, patient and unblinking. "You'll want to turn that on. The truth must be kept, not believed, but kept. Once I begin, I cannot stop. And when I finish—" She vanished past me to the upper banister where a chandelier hung like a blackened carcass. "You'll leave before nightfall. Or not at all." I pressed the red button. Isadora leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. The silence that followed stretched so long, I thought she'd forgotten I was there. Then softly, she began to speak. "The Lenley name was once a crown in Ashmill. My great-grandmother, Cordelia Lenley, laid the first stone of this house in 1871. They said she came from salt and old blood, that her people could see beyond death. What they didn't say, but what I will, is that our fortune was not built by hands, it was built by sacrament. There are rules in this world, but some families learned how to bargain with the ones outside them. We did not worship them. No, we fed them, we made promises, and they gave us power. But power, real power, is never clean." She paused, and in that moment I felt the house shift, a faint vibration through the floorboards. The air in the room cooled noticeably. I was the last to receive the rites. I watched my mother die screaming. I watched my sisters vanish into the walls, and now I am the only one left. Not because I refused the darkness, but because I followed it deeper than any of them. She leant forward. "And now it must end. You are here because someone must hear the truth, someone must carry it, or else the roots will grow again." I wanted to ask questions about the rituals, about the walls, about what she meant by roots, but something in her eyes stopped me. That wasn't a metaphor, it was a warning. She gestured to a door behind her, half-rotted and lined with heavy bolts. "When you return tomorrow, we begin. You will stay in the east wing. The house knows you're here now. It will watch you, but it won't touch you. If you stay quiet, if you stay inside your room after midnight." I nodded, unsure if I was agreeing or just afraid to say no. Isadora stood with great effort, joints creaking like branches, and handed me a brass key with a snake-shaped handle. "One more thing," she said, her voice lowering. "If you hear footsteps in the attic tonight, do not listen. Do not speak. Just wait until morning." With that, she turned and vanished through the bolted door, leaving me alone in the heart of the house. The sun had begun to set, and I had never felt so uninvited. The east wing was colder than the rest of the house. That's the first thing I noticed as I unlocked the door to my assigned room. The key fit with a reluctant click, and the door sighed open, revealing a chamber that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Roosevelt administration.
Heavy curtains hung like stage props over tall windows, sealing out what little light the waning dusk provided. Dust blanketed everything: bedspread, vanity, even the ceiling fan which dangled overhead like a guillotine. It smelled of lavender turned sour, and of something older, something wet beneath the floorboards. I didn't unpack. I left my duffel by the door and took inventory. One antique bed, a faded armoire, an oil painting of a woman standing at the edge of a dark field, and a large mirror opposite the bed, draped in a moth-eaten sheet. I didn't lift the sheet. Instead, I turned on my recorder and whispered a time-stamped update. Lenley Estate. Interior condition, decayed but preserved. Everything feels staged, nothing broken, yet untouched, like the house is posing, pretending to sleep. There were no clocks, no electronics, no signs of life apart from the distant rhythmic groan of settling beams. I turned off the recorder and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress sigh beneath me. Outside, night fell with deliberate slowness. The sky bruised into a deep plum, and the trees clawed at the window panes like silhouettes behind rice paper. I watched from the corner of the curtain, wondering what I'd really stepped into. Because it was clear, even before the confession began, this house wanted me here, or needed me, and it hadn't had visitors in a very long time. At exactly midnight, the floorboard beneath the far corner of the room gave a soft pop, as if someone had pressed their foot against it. I froze, listening. Then another step, and another. Upstairs, in the attic, exactly where Isadora had warned me not to listen. The steps didn't pace, they didn't wander. They simply walked once across the length of the ceiling, and then stopped. I held my breath for several minutes. Eventually, the silence returned, deeper than before. Morning broke behind gray mist. I hadn't slept, but I'd remained in the bed, eyes fixed on the draped mirror and the dust mote spinning in its orbit. I ventured out once the light was steady and explored the house with my recorder clutched tight. The mansion wasn't simply large, it was labyrinthine. Hallways curved at impossible angles, rooms connected in ways that defied the blueprint I sketched in my mind. One door led to a ballroom entirely preserved in black cloth, chandeliers sheathed like corpses. Another opened onto a windowless nursery where rocking horses faced the walls, and the wallpaper curled like skin. There were no family portraits. But signs of them lingered, handwritten labels under oil paintings that had been scraped clean, cabinets filled with monogrammed teacups, shoes lined in perfect rows beneath covered beds, as if the Lenleys had been expected to return, or had never really left. The centerpiece of the house, though, was the central stair, the grand spiral that wound up 4 stories like the spine of a creature too big to see at once. At its base stood a grandfather clock stopped at 11:59, its pendulum held aloft by invisible strings, never dropping. Isadora was waiting for me on the second-floor landing. She wore the same dress, but her hair was down, long and white as frost. Behind her, a pair of doors led to what I assumed was the old family library. She didn't speak until I stood beside her. "You explored," she said. Not a question. I nodded. "Good. The house will remember you now. It will begin to show you things. Just remember, it doesn't want understanding. It wants obedience." She opened the library doors, and I stepped into a room thick with the smell of rot and knowledge. Bookshelves towered to the ceiling, old leather-bound volumes with titles in Latin, Greek, some in no language I recognized. A globe in the corner spun slowly, though no draft stirred. The fireplace was cold, but the ashes were fresh. Isadora walked to a desk beneath a portrait, the only intact one I'd seen.
a woman in black cradling a child whose eyes had been scratched out. Her face looked uncannily like Isidora's. "This is where we begin," she said. I pressed record. The Lenley estate was built to contain what we called the inheritance. It began with Cordelia, yes, but the house itself, the grounds, the design, these were not of her making. She was taught how to build it, just as I was taught how to maintain it. Every room has a purpose, every door is a threshold, and beneath it all, far beneath the foundations, something waits, something that breathes with our blood and feeds on our grief. She placed a faded map in front of me, an architectural plan that didn't match the house I'd walked through. More rooms, more levels, symbols I'd seen before in books about burial rituals and ancient protections. But the house is dying because I am dying, and when I go, it will try to wake unless someone seals it again. She turned to me, eyes hollow and glowing faintly in the library's dimness. "That's why you're here." She spoke like someone waking from a century-long dream, each word heavy, deliberate, as though it cost her to say it. The recorder blinked red on the table between us as the room seemed to close in around her voice. I was born in this house in the winter of 1926. The walls were still red then, painted with oxblood to hide the stains. My mother told me it was tradition, that everything in this house was soaked in tradition, and I would understand in time. She laced her fingers, brittle and pale, as if afraid they'd snap under pressure. Before I turned 6, I had seen 4 births and 2 deaths. None of them happened in hospitals. All of them happened here. My cousins were born behind drapes while the family chanted. My aunt bled out in the bath, laughing. My brother was buried before he could walk. The Lenley bloodline, we weren't made for the outside world. I asked her when she first realized something was wrong. She smiled without warmth. Wrong? Nothing was ever wrong. It simply was. You can't name something as broken if you've never seen it whole. Isidora stood slowly and walked toward the library shelves, trailing her fingers along the spines of books thick with dust and symbols.
We were taught young, ritual before reason, silence before speech. Every Lenley child was given 2 things on their 7th birthday, a locked box and a sealed envelope. We weren't allowed to open them until our first bloodletting. That usually came by 12. "Bloodletting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She nodded. "It's not as archaic as it sounds. A drop, a smear. It was about acknowledgement. Our bodies were vessels. The blood had to be introduced to the house, and the house, in turn, would begin to respond." She pulled a volume from the shelf, a handwritten journal bound in human skin. I recognized the texture, though I wished I hadn't. "This was Cordelia's," she said. "She was the first to succeed." I didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. Isidora laid the book open, revealing pages stained with ink and something darker. Each entry was a ritual, handwritten, annotated, revised. Some were instructions. Others, apologies. The inheritance isn't about money. It's about memory. Our memories. Cordelia discovered how to preserve them, not in journals, not in tapes, but in space, in wood, in flesh. This house is our tombstone, our reliquary. I asked how the process worked. What was preserved? How? Isadora's voice dropped lower. We fed it. Pieces of ourselves. Hair, teeth, fingernails, secrets. The house remembers all of it. It stores us in corners, echoes us in the floors. And when a Lenley dies inside its walls, the soul doesn't leave. It binds. That's why the house doesn't age, because it's filled with all of us, crying to be remembered. She turned to me, eyes suddenly wet. But memory is never clean. It festers. It multiplies, especially the parts we tried to hide. There was a long pause, during which the house creaked above us, like something pacing in the attic again. She didn't speak right away. She simply stared into the empty fireplace, as if watching a memory replay in the soot. The fire was dead, yet something in the hearth stirred. Ash slid aside like wind across snow, exposing old teeth and something like a knuckle bone. I said nothing, waiting for Isadora to continue. I asked her what that meant. She turned to the journal again, flipping to a page marked by a dried thistle pressed between entries. The script was tighter here, almost frantic, and the ink had bled through as if written in haste. The Lenley women were encouraged to bear many children, not for love, for continuation, for refinement. My stomach twisted. You're saying they were bred? She nodded, almost imperceptibly. The family believed that each generation could improve the connection. The children weren't just heirs, they were vessels, hosts, for what we were trying to reach. She ran her finger down the names in the margins of the journal. Lucian, Thora, Edda, Silas, Romalie. I counted 23. Each had a date beside it. Most lived no longer than a few years. Only 3 survived past adolescence, and none of them left the house. I asked what had happened to the others. She inhaled sharply. Some vanished, into the walls. Others began to change, not visibly, not at first. It was in the way they looked at you, the way they mimicked you too precisely, or laughed at things no one else heard. She stood, beckoning me to follow. I'll show you. We passed through a corridor I hadn't seen before, low-ceilinged and narrow, its floor covered in a faded red runner that smelled faintly of mildew and burnt herbs. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, revealing wood slabs behind it. As we walked, I began to notice scratches. Not scratches, clawing. Isadora stopped beside a door with no handle. It was flush with the wall, nearly invisible, but I could see the faint outline. This used to be the nursery wing, before the walls decided it wasn't Nuz. She pressed her palm flat against the door, and with a soft moan of shifting wood, it opened.
The room beyond was small and windowless, lit by the weak glow of an oil lamp mounted in the corner. There were 3 child-sized beds, 2 of them broken. On the far wall, scrawled in chalk, was a crude drawing. A tall, thin figure with too many fingers and no face. Surrounding it were smaller stick children, all reaching upward, mouths agape. I moved closer, raising my recorder. Isadora touched the wall lightly, brushing her fingertips across the chalk. This is what they said came to them in their sleep. They called it Mother's Shadow. It promised them songs, secrets, and freedom. She turned toward me. They weren't dreaming, and it wasn't a game. She led me down a staircase, hidden behind a bookshelf, descending into a passage that felt more root than architecture. The walls here were earth, supported by timber soaked through with age and seepage. The air thickened, mold clung to every breath. "I'll show you where the others went," she said, "the ones who couldn't be let go." The stairs ended at a rusted iron grate. Beyond it, a corridor split into 3 paths, each barely tall enough to crawl through. From one, a faint sound echoed, like a lullaby hummed off-key. I could feel the vibration in my teeth. "We sealed them," Isadora whispered, "the ones who changed too fast, who couldn't control their hunger. We gave them food, books, even toys, but eventually they stopped pretending." "Pretending what?" "That they were still children." She placed her palm on the wall beside the grate. The earth was warm. "One day they stopped answering, but we still heard them." I looked into the tunnels, my flashlight cutting through the dark. The walls weren't just soil. They were lined with bones, meticulously arranged, phalanges, femurs, mandibles, all child-sized. I stepped back. "Who did this?" Isadora didn't answer. She simply turned and began walking back. I followed, unable to breathe until we emerged once more into the cold air of the upper house. She paused beside a boarded-up window. "I had a sister," she said. "Romilly. She was the brightest of us, beautiful, obedient, and filled with light, until she turned 13. "What happened?" "She went missing one night. We searched for days, and then one morning I heard singing from the walls, a song only Romilly knew. It was coming from above. I followed it to the attic. When I opened the door," her voice broke, "she was there, or something that wore her face, but it wasn't her anymore. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth was full of dirt. She said she was free. I asked her what she did." "I locked the attic," Isadora whispered, "and I never went back." Back in the library, I pressed her for more. Who was this Mother's Shadow? Was it part of their religion, a spirit? She shook her head slowly. "She isn't a spirit. Spirits move on. This entity clings. She was drawn to Cordelia first, promised her endurance, promised that the Lenleys would never die, and she was right. We haven't really." I asked how long the children had been alive, or whatever the right word was. "Time doesn't move the same beneath the house," Isadora said. "They age in ways we don't understand, or maybe become something else." "Are they still there?" Her face darkened. "The walls have been quiet for a decade, but last week I heard the lullaby again." She looked at me with sudden intensity. "That's when I sent the letter."
As I returned to my room that night, I felt the walls differently. They didn't just contain space, they watched. Each creak in the floorboards above wasn't just old wood, it was pacing, testing, remembering me. And just before I turned out the oil lamp, I noticed something carved into the wood beneath the mirror, something I hadn't seen before.
A small child's handprint. Fresh, still damp. They came at dawn. Ashmill was still a town of whispers then, farming families with long memories and longer grudges. By the time I was 10, the first signs of what was coming had already bloomed like rot behind wallpaper. Livestock miscarriages, milk that curdled before it was poured, children sleepwalking into the woods and waking with mouthfuls of earth. And always they pointed to us, the Lenleys. Not with open accusations, yet, not until the school fire. Isadora leaned against the window frame as she spoke, her voice thin and rough with years. Outside, morning struggled through the fog like a ghost with no name. It was the year after Caleb vanished beneath the floor, she said. There were only 5 of us left in the house. Myself, my mother, Eugenia, Uncle Lorcan, Aunt Gilda, and Romilly. The others had disappeared. She tapped her temple gently. Or fractured. The fire started in the nursery of the town's only elementary school. 4 children died. 2 more never woke from their burns. The cause was ruled electrical, but the townspeople saw the symbol scorched into the linoleum, a black ring with a line through it. The same symbol etched into the corners of Lenley bucks and stitched into the collars of their heirlooms. It wasn't a coincidence. They stopped speaking to us at the market, Isadora said. Stopped selling us bread, eggs, salt. They put crosses in our fields, buried knives at the corners of our land. It was ancient superstition, but some of it worked. She closed her eyes. Until Gilda tried to bring Romilly back. I asked her what she meant by bring back. Romilly had been missing for over a year by then. Isadora didn't answer at first. She walked to the fireplace and retrieved a photo hidden behind a broken frame, a Polaroid of a circle drawn in chalk on the library floor, candles, bones, a child's shoe in the center. She tried to summon her, Isadora whispered. But what came wasn't Romilly. That was the turning point. After that night, something began bleeding through the Lenley estate's walls, visible not just to the family, but to the town. Crops began to rot overnight, but only those that bordered Lenley land. A preacher's son was found in the graveyard, eyes burned clean from his sockets. Dogs stopped barking at the house. They began whimpering and clawing at the dirt to hide. The townspeople began to dream of the house, shared dreams, recurring. And in every dream, they said there was a voice whispering from a high window, "Bring me the blood." The mayor called a meeting, quiet but absolute. On a calm Thursday morning in 1939, 32 men and women walked up Hallamere Road carrying kerosene, stakes, and salt. Some brought holy water. Some brought knives. None of them brought forgiveness. I was 15, Isadora said, her voice barely audible. Mother told me to stay in the east wing and bolt the doors. But I watched it all from the attic window. She took a long breath. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply acted. They started with the orchard, salted the soil. Then the greenhouse, smashed every pane. The chapel went up like paper. Gilda tried to run out screaming scripture. They struck her with the butt of a rifle and dragged her into the fire. I couldn't speak. They nailed Lorcan to the front door. "What?" I choked out. Isadora nodded, eyes dry but distant. He didn't scream, just stared at them. And when the blood touched the doorframe, the house woke.
She turned slowly toward the fireplace. "You've felt it, haven't you? The hum in the floor, the sigh in the walls. It remembers. It remembers everything." I asked what happened next. She said the town crossed a line. They opened a gate they didn't understand. The same people who lit the fires began to bleed from the nose and ears. One woman, the baker's wife, aged 40 years in a night. By sunrise, 12 were dead. Not by our hands, by its. "Caleb?" She hesitated. Not just Caleb, all of them. The house, the children, the ones buried and the ones bound in the brick. She leaned close, her voice shaking. And the thing they'd been feeding, the one that lived beneath us, coiled in the foundation like a root system waiting for rain. After the attack, Ashmill changed. The surviving townspeople never spoke of what happened. There was no investigation, no newspaper clippings, no funerals. They simply rewrote reality.
"We became myth," Isadora said. "A warning story. Don't go up Hallowmere Road. Don't say the Lenley name." And the estate? The town drew the boundaries tighter. They let the forest reclaim the road, let it vanish from the map. "Why didn't they tear the house down?" She looked at me, almost smiling. "They couldn't. Every time someone tried, something happened. Heart attacks, suicides, madness. The land rejected the erasure." She opened a drawer and handed me a small envelope, yellowed and brittle. Inside was a map of Ashmill, hand-drawn with a circle drawn in red ink around the estate. A second circle surrounded the original, 3 times its size. "The barrier," she said. "The town knows not to expand past it. Every house, every farm, it stops here. And do you know why?" I shook my head. "Because the house isn't just waiting, it's watching, and it's growing, quietly, like rot beneath floorboards." She turned the envelope over, written in shaky script. "Containment is not victory. The silence is not safety." I asked her why she had waited so long to speak. Why tell the story now? She looked at me with hollow calm. "Because I'm dying," she said. "And when I die, the house will be hungry." "And you want me to do what?" I asked. "Tell the world?" She shook her head. "No, the world won't believe you. I want you to know, to remember, because soon the dreams will spread again, the hunger. And when it starts, someone will need to recognize the signs." Outside, the wind rose sharply, bending the trees as if something enormous had exhaled. She stood with great effort and walked toward the back of the library, placing her palm on a wall I'd assumed was just decorative paneling. With a soft groan, the wall opened. Behind it, a spiral staircase curved down into the earth. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go below." The air changed the moment I stepped onto the spiral staircase. The temperature dropped, but it wasn't cold like wind or stone. It was a dead cold, like the inside of something that had never been alive. The walls narrowed as we descended, carved from raw earth and ribbed with root veins that pulsed faintly when brushed. "Speak nothing," Isadora warned. "The air here remembers sound." I nodded and kept my recorder off, holding it in my coat pocket with a trembling hand. The stairway ended in a circular chamber lit by guttering black candles. The flame wasn't natural. It glowed violet at the edges, throwing twisted shadows that bent in unnatural directions. The floor was tiled in ancient stone, some pieces so old the carvings had eroded into unrecognizable grooves. Others were pristine, as if newly etched. At the center stood a stone table. On it, a length of black silk. The veil.
Isadora moved with solemnity, unwrapping the silk to reveal what lay beneath. A ritual knife, a bound book with a cover of stitched leather, and a length of braided hair coiled like a sleeping snake. "This is where the line was consecrated," she said softly, "where Cordelia made the pact." I asked her what kind of pact it was. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Shame. She was desperate. Her children kept dying. The land wouldn't bear crops. The family name was drowning in obscurity. So she reached out, and something answered. I asked her if she meant a demon. "No," she whispered, "something older, something beneath what we call demons. The entity has no name that can be spoken. Cordelia called it Mother in the Root." She gestured for me to sit beside the stone table. She didn't summon it. It was already here, sleeping in the land. The Lenleys didn't invite it. They awakened it. And in return for sacrifice, it gave them what they asked for. What did they ask for? Legacy, endurance, fertility, influence. It gave them the means to manipulate memory, to bind soul to space. But it required a price. She held up the ritual blade. It was bone-handled, etched with spiral designs, and crusted at the tip with dried black residue. Once every generation, a daughter of the line must complete the black veil ritual, alone, unobserved. She must give of herself, blood, hair, a secret. Then she must speak the vow. She opened the book and read the vow aloud. "I veil the light to keep the line. I bind my flesh to root and stone. Let me forget the sky and be remembered forever." She paused, trembling. "I said those words when I was 16. The room was warmer then, the presence closer. It spoke in visions. It showed me what would come." She turned her eyes to me, and I saw terror trapped beneath glassy calm. I saw fire, screams in the soil, my child growing wrong inside me, and this house split open like a fruit, feeding on the town. Isadora lit incense from one of the candle flames and placed it before the veil. The smoke didn't rise. It curled downward, seeping into the cracks between stones. She handed me the knife. "No," I said, "you don't have to use it," she replied. "Only hold it. Feel it." The moment my fingers closed around the hilt, my vision blurred. The chamber darkened, and for a moment I wasn't in the room. I was beneath it, somewhere deep, buried in black soil, pressed between roots that flexed and coiled. I heard children sobbing softly, a woman's voice humming a lullaby, and something else, breathing, slow, rhythmic, a breath that echoed inside my skull. Then I saw her.
Not Isadora. Cordelia. Her face was a blank white mask, her mouth open far too wide, her eyes filled with worms. She leaned close. "Tell the story," she said, "or it will be told without you." I dropped the knife. The room returned. Isadora stood over me, silent. "You saw her," she said. "She's been waiting." I asked why she was showing me this. Why now? Isadora reached beneath the altar and removed a bundle of cloth. Inside was a baby's bonnet stained with something dark and brittle. "This belonged to Caleb," she whispered. "He was never meant to inherit. But the ritual wasn't done properly when I bore him. I faltered. The veil slipped. I couldn't say the vow." "And that broke the chain?" I asked. "No," she said.
It made him something else. He was part of the pact, but unbound by it. He carried the hunger without the seal. That's why he's still alive. Or whatever he is now. She placed the bonnet back beneath the altar. When I die, there will be no one left to renew the vow. The house will become untethered. The entity will stretch beyond its roots. The children in the walls will move again, and Ashmill will remember. Her hand trembled as she pressed the veil to her chest. I want to die free, not bound. But to do that, someone must know every piece of the truth. That's why you're here. You're not just a witness. You're the next threshold. I stared at her. What do you mean? But she didn't answer. She only began to hum, the same lullaby I had heard from the tunnels. The house was the heart, but the land was the lungs, and they were still breathing.
The soil beneath that tree was warm to the touch. I placed my hand there and closed my eyes. A sound rose from beneath the earth. A heartbeat, not mine. Then a voice. Faint. Familiar. Come closer. I stood abruptly, stumbling backward. My hand burned where I'd touched the dirt. No wound, no mark, but the sensation lingered like a fresh brand. I left the orchard through the side gate, following a narrow path toward the edge of the field. The fog seemed thicker here. The wind hissed through the dead grass like something with teeth. Then I saw it. The well. A squat iron-sealed mouth in the earth, covered in chains and surrounded by salt stones. I moved toward it slowly, as if something might reach out if I moved too fast. The chains were rusted but intact. A heavy lock clung to the hatch, its keyhole filled with wax. I pressed my ear to the side. Children. Laughing. Then sobbing. Then laughing again. The recorder buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't take it out. I didn't want a record of that sound. Some things should be forgotten. I stepped back from the well, and then I noticed the soil again. It moved. Not shifted. Moved. Like something breathing just below the surface. Slow. Rhythmic. Like the thing in the basement. The house's lungs were here, expanding, inhaling. And I was standing in its mouth. I ran. Past the orchard, past the greenhouse, until I reached the field. What I saw there made me stop cold. It was enormous. Acres of gray, cracked dirt. No crops, no insects, not even birds above it. The trees at its edge were bent away from it, like they were recoiling. The air vibrated, faint but steady, like standing near a generator you couldn't see. The field was silent. Then it spoke. Not aloud, not in words, but I heard names whispered in my bones. Names I didn't know but recognized. I'd seen them in the journals, the birth records, the margins of Cordelia's texts. The field wasn't just cursed. It was alive, and it carried memory. The Lenleys hadn't just bled on this land. They'd merged with it. This was where the rituals had begun. This was where they'd bargained, and now the land remembered everything. I dropped to my knees and dug into the soil with my hands. It crumbled like ash, but just beneath the surface, I found a tooth. Small, human, tiled-sized. Then a button, then a piece of bone. I stood, trembling. This wasn't a farm. It was a mass grave with roots. Back at the house, Isadora met me on the porch, as if she'd known where I was all along. "You went to the field," she said. I nodded. "Did it speak to you?" "Yes." "What did it say?" I swallowed hard. It asked if I would stay. She looked away. "They all ask that. Everyone who hears the land hears the offer. The roots always want more." That night, when I returned to my room, I found something waiting on my pillow. A single apple. Gray-skinned, bruised, and carved into its side. "The harvest is not done." The gallery was never on any map of the house. I found it after midnight, led there not by direction, but by instinct, or maybe invitation. A door that had been walled off the day before now stood ajar, spilling thin slivers of light into the corridor. The hallway beyond was lined with dust-caked sconces and wallpaper that looked more like old skin than paper.
I passed rooms filled with mirrors covered in cloth, doors nailed shut with iron, and hallways that twisted at unnatural angles, looping back into themselves. And then I found it, the portrait hall. Long, narrow, silent, lit only by flickering bulbs dangling from frayed cords in the ceiling. The light buzzed faintly, and each flicker seemed to shift the space by a breath. Walls closing in, floorboards creaking even though I hadn't moved. The portraits began at the far end, and I felt, without being told, that I had to walk them in order. The first was Cordelia. Her eyes were intact this time, piercing, too wide, pupils like ink stains. Her expression was blank, but not empty. The kind of face you see in dreams and wake remembering nothing but fear. She wore mourning black, a veil draped behind her like a shroud. Her hands held a child with no face. I moved on. The next portrait was of Eugenia, Isadora's mother. She looked like a dried flower pinned to a canvas. Her fingers curled around a string of black pearls that seemed to glisten wetly, though the paint was matte. Behind her, a door hung open to a stairwell filled with red mist. Her plaque read, "Eugenia Lenley, Mother of Memory." I took a step closer. The pearls in the painting shifted. I stepped back. They stilled. Further down, the portraits grew stranger. A man with no mouth, holding a wedding ring between his teeth. A girl, Remilly, I knew without being told, smiling wide, but her shadow on the canvas was taller, with eyes where its hands should be. Then one of a young boy, Caleb. The paint around him was cracked and blistered, as though it had burned and been painted over again. His eyes were black pits, and beneath the canvas, something moved, a bulge pressing from inside the frame, as if the painting breathed. My recorder clicked twice in my pocket. I hadn't touched it. Then a voice played back. Not mine, not Isadora's. Just one word. Father. The final portrait was covered with a black veil, dusty, frayed. I shouldn't have touched it, but my hands moved on their own. I pulled the veil away. It was Isadora, or what had once been her. She was younger in this painting, 40 maybe, but her skin was cracked like old porcelain, and her mouth was stitched shut with wire. Her hands held nothing, but blood dripped from her wrists, pooling at her feet and leaking from the frame onto the floor. I stepped back. The blood was real, fresh. I looked down. A small puddle had formed below the painting, still warm. Suddenly, the lights went out. Total blackness. I froze. Then something shifted behind me. Wood creaked. Breathing. Close. Too close. I turned. Nothing there. But when I turned back, the portraits had changed. Cordelia was gone. So was Remilly. Their frames hung empty, glass shattered. The portrait of Caleb screamed. Not a sound I heard with my ears, but one that split my skull like glass under pressure. I staggered back, fell, and when I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. The gallery was gone. I was in a nursery. Dust-choked and cobwebbed. Toys lined the shelves. dolls with no eyes, blocks spelling words that weren't English, and a rocking horse carved with teeth along its saddle. The walls dripped, not water, paint, thick, red, still wet. And on the far wall, painted with inhuman precision, was the image of me, sitting, recording, bleeding from the eyes. Then a voice, soft, female. Now you see why we never left. It was behind me, Isadora.
Only not. She looked translucent, flickering like candlelight. You saw their faces, she said. Now they've seen yours. She pointed to my chest. I looked down. A handprint, small, child-sized, was pressed into my shirt, as if someone had touched me with paint-soaked fingers. Isadora stepped back into shadow. They remember everyone who enters. Then she vanished. And I woke. On the floor of the gallery, alone. My recorder, still running, had captured everything. My footsteps, my questions, the sound of the veil lifting, but not the voices, not the screams, just static. Until the end. One last word, whispered in my voice. Stay. The air was thicker in the mornings now, damp, metallic, like breath exhaled from a wound that refused to close. After the gallery, I no longer slept. Not truly. When I closed my eyes, I heard the hum of paintings remembering my face. I felt the pressure of tiny hands pressing against the inside of the walls. The house had absorbed me, drawn me into its pulse, and I feared that leaving would only carry it with me. Still, I followed Isadora when she summoned me, this time to the cellar beneath the chapel ruins. You must see where it ends, she said. And I believed her. Because I'd begun to understand. Nothing in this place ended. It simply nested deeper. The chapel's foundation was split by a hidden passage, stone stairs spiraling down into a hollow that reeked of salt and wax. We descended in silence, our shadows doubling in the flickering lantern light. The walls here were smooth, polished bone white, not painted, not stone, polished, as though hundreds of hands had stroked the surface for decades. The floor sloped inward as we reached the base, opening into a chamber I can only describe as sacred in the way catacombs are sacred, heavy with reverence and rot. Coffins lined the walls, recessed into niches carved with names and symbols. Cordelia, Eugenia, Romilly, even Gilda and Lorcan, their deaths confirmed by both plaque and photograph. Each coffin was sealed with red wax, black salt sprinkled in rings around their thresholds. But one niche was empty. I didn't ask. Isadora answered anyway. Mine, she whispered. It's waiting. Her hands shook as she lit incense and placed it at the center of the room, beside a blackened stone altar stained from decades of bleeding. This is the room of endings, but also beginnings. Each matriarch must die here, willingly, to anchor the seal, to preserve what little boundary we have left. She turned to me then, and I saw what had been hiding in her eyes since the beginning. Resignation, not fear. I should have done it years ago, but I was selfish. I waited. I watched. I let Caleb survive. And now,
Her gaze lifted to the ceiling, as if she could see the roots above curling through the house, the town, the earth. I asked her if this would stop it, if her death here would fix anything. She shook her head. No, but it will delay the worst. It will give you time to decide what to do with the truth. Then she handed me the veil, the same one used in the ritual. It felt cold in my hands, too heavy for silk. "When I go," she said, "you will seal this room. You will not return, not ever. Do you understand?" I nodded, not because I understood, but because there was nothing else I could do. She climbed into the open niche without help, laid back against the stone, folded her hands across her chest, and then, for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. "Tell them," she said, "not to believe, not to follow, just to remember." I stepped back, lit the salt, and watched as the flame spread in a circle around her. Her breath slowed, her eyes closed, and then she was gone. No gasp, no final word, just stillness, as if she'd never moved at all. I sealed the chamber as instructed: wax, salt, iron. And I left. The house was different now, quieter, less tense, but not peaceful. The walls didn't creak, the shadows didn't shift, but I knew it was not rest. It was waiting. I left the next morning, drove back to the city, burned the clothes I wore, locked the recordings in a box, and buried them beneath concrete. But the story stayed, and so did the whispers. 3 weeks after publishing the obituary, just a small one, no mention of the Lenley name, I received an envelope, unmarked. Inside was a photograph of me, standing in the portrait gallery. But in the image, my eyes were black, and behind me, just barely visible in the warped canvas of Caleb's portrait, a shape had begun to emerge. Long, thin, smiling. The gallery is gone now, burned, but the land still remembers, and so do I. If you hear your name in the soil, don't answer. If you feel something beneath your house, humming, don't dig. And if you find an old letter sealed in black wax, leave it unopened. Because the last Lenley may be dead, but the house is listening, and it's still hungry.